Good day, folks. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Get Cleared Show. Now, one thing we emphasize time and time again on this platform is that building a property portfolio isn't a solo journey. It's akin to assembling a winning sports team. Each player has a pivotal role, and their collaboration is the formula for success. Whether you are diving headfirst into property investment or you're merely taking your initial steps in purchasing a home, your dream team should encompass a mix of the right professionals, from a mortgage broker to a property manager, buyer's agent, and of course, a solicitor. And why is that, you may ask? Because a single misstep can be costly, both in terms of time and money. That's why today, we are spotlighting the latter, a critical stakeholder in the property world, the solicitor. Navigating the maze of legalities in the property world can be daunting, and the right solicitor will not only guide you through ensuring you are legally protected, but can also be your compass in making financially sound decisions. But not all solicitors are made equal, and the one you select could be the difference between a dream property purchase and a legal nightmare. This brings us to our esteemed guest for the Get Cleared Show, someone who has been championing this cause for 3 decades. With an impressive background that encompasses both the legal and financial dimensions of property conveyance, he's been at the helm of over 30,000 conveyances. And what's more, his commitment to his clients is unparalleled. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you David Martell from Priority Legal Services, a stalwart in the legal realm who's reshaping the way we view conveyance. David, welcome to Get Cleared Show.
Thank you very much, Rasti. That's such a lovely introduction. I'm very flattered. Really appreciate that.
Thanks for taking time out to share your knowledge, your insights with the audience. David, if you don't mind, let's begin with your story. What drove you to become a solicitor in the first place, if you don't mind me asking?
Look, I have always been a little bit of an entrepreneur all my life, and I started my first business when I was 13 and did quite well at that particular stage. But when it came through the high school, I wanted to do business. I wanted to do commerce, accounting. And my stepfather, one of his friends, actually asked me whether I had thought about law. And when I really did think about it, learning how to, understand business, understand the law, make sure that everything could be done properly, correctly, that really was the path for me. And I was very fortunate that I was offered article clerkship by a gentleman who's a solicitor, and here I am today.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Look, with so many avenues in the legal profession, I'll be very keen to understand what drove you specifically towards the property law, David.
That was I've always, like I said, been very interested as an entrepreneur, and property has always been in my blood. And I bought my first investment property when I was 28 years old. And at that stage, I thought I was probably 7 years too late. And every time I was driving from Brisbane down to the Gold Coast, I'd be seeing all these big signs in relation to buy this property at $78,000. A year and a half later, we're looking at it again. It's now $88,000, and it kept going up. And just knowing and looking at the property market, that was the place where I was going to go, because I bought my first 2 investment properties before I was at 30 and before I bought my principal place of residence. And after that, we've done every type of property investing you could think of.
No, well done.
Yes.
Now you've built a very successful business out there, Priority Legal Services, and it has a really prominent presence. So I would like to understand, is it a particular region that you operate in, any particular state? Where all you're licensed to operate, David, as a business?
Yeah, look, over the years, it was very interesting. We originally started our conveyancing in Queensland. And as we got a bit bigger, our clients would end up asking us, oh, can you do New South Wales, or can you do Victoria? Then it got to a stage where most of our clients were saying, we don't ask you, can you, we want you to. And ultimately with the demand, we went from Queensland. We then included Victoria, we included South Australia, we included then New South Wales and Western Australia. So throughout Australia, we do all of the states except for Tasmania, because we don't get too much demand for down there, but we do everywhere else.
That sounds very, very entrepreneurial from one point of view, but also it seems that you're very much client focused, because if your investor client is buying one time in Queensland and then second time they're buying in Victoria or WA, they don't really have to keep switching for the solicitor, because they can potentially come to you for, of course, with barring Tasmania, they can come to you for the need of solicitor any part of country by sounds of it.
Absolutely. And people will end up getting a lot of their success in property investing by having that good team around them. So instead of being able to or having to go to a different person in a different state, having that one organisation or one person to be able to deal with and go on that journey with you, then it's been very good for both ourselves as well as our clients.
Now, David, thank you so much for sharing that you operate almost in every state. And we have always emphasized that buying a property and building a portfolio is certainly a business for them as a property investor. So they need to have the right team to deliver on that. So what's your take on that emphasis of having that right team?
Yeah, look, it is really important to have the right people and have a right team. When you are going into any type of business, and property investing is really a business, you need to have the people around you who you trust and who do understand exactly what the market is and their specific expertise. And once you have that group around you, and it only needs to be the select group, then you certainly can be quite happy to go on your journey and to be able to do it correctly and right, and knowing that you're doing it correctly and right with the right professionals with you.
Wonderful, wonderful. So now just jumping the gears, and I'll be keen to understand, like, why is it so crucial for property buyers or investors to have the right solicitors by their side?
Well, solicitors, they work in so many different types of areas of law, and you'll have criminal lawyers, family lawyers, commercial lawyers, and every lawyer is entitled and can do all the different types of work. Now, most law firms will have a conveyancing division, and conveyancing is deemed to be the bread and butter of a law firm. However, they don't specifically work and have as conveyancing their mainstay of their business. So when you have a solicitor, a law firm which specifically specialises and only works in the conveyancing, the property law contract division or section of the law, that's when you have the right people on board, because they are invested to make sure that their clients are buying and being protected when purchasing the right investment properties.
No, wonderful, wonderful. And from your experience, what would you say is the biggest myth people have about solicitors?
A lot of people think that solicitors are people who you can't approach, and because they are lawyers. And in that respect, in my younger years, I did have many situations when I did a lot of litigation where my clients wouldn't be open and upfront. And they always, when I'd ask what the issue was, they'd say, "We're intimidated." Well, in actual fact, us solicitors, we're actually not intimidating, and we are just people like yourselves. And when somebody is passionate in relation to what they do, for instance, buying properties, in property, etc., then that is when you will get somebody who will be able to provide you with exactly what you need, the right professional advice and the right people on your team.
No, wonderful. And look, when we are buying properties for our clients, then they sometimes need introduction for someone who can do the convincing for them. And I've always believed that solicitor is in a better position to help them. So just for the clarification, would you mind demystifying the difference between a conveyancer and a solicitor for our audience?
In the different states of Australia, you have a situation where you can have just a licensed conveyancer who can do the conveyancing work. And a licensed conveyancer is somebody who is taught how to do conveyancing. And they do a course, and they are taught exactly how to do the conveyancing. And that is really what it is. Once they've done the course and they've passed, they're classed as a conveyancer. They work under somebody and then get their experience in the actual field. Where a solicitor is somebody who's trained in the law. And being trained in the law, when buying a property, you're dealing with contract law and you're also dealing with property law. So when things do go wrong, If you have a solicitor working for you, then you will end up having that legal knowledge and basis to have that information immediately. But not only that, you'll have that knowledge as to how to deal with that particular situation immediately. With licensed conveyancers, unfortunately, they don't have the legal knowledge, and you would end up having to be passed over to a law firm. If they are in a law firm, then you'd be passed over to the lawyers to then deal with that particular situation. I always say if somebody is going to be doing a major investment, then they should really look at getting the right people, and solicitors are the right people to do the job.
Now, that's a great point there, David. And I always just looking at the pricing model of conveyancer versus solicitor, conveyancers are typically economical compared to the charges of a solicitor. And I do appreciate where you're coming from, that because they have the understanding of the law and they don't really need to be referred to because they have understanding, they can really take that, I guess, scenario whereby it becomes a bit more of a legal, I don't know whether I can say the word battle, but they can really take on head on because they are equipped with that knowledge. But for those who are price conscious, sometimes it really makes sense for them to think about conveyancing. But just from your point of view, because you see the difference between a conveyancing as well as a soliciting about property purchase, is there any scenario where people should choose a conveyancer over a solicitor?
Look, I don't think so at all. And the reason is whilst, say our firm is a law firm and you have solicitors dealing with it, we also have our conveyancers who work in the firm as well. Now, the actual fees which you would be charged from, say, our firm or another law firm, which is a conveyancing business, they are competitive with conveyancers themselves. So in that respect, you would not have too much difference at all, if any, in relation to the actual fees. Because a law firm doing conveyancing has to be competitive, and it just comes down to, I guess, the field in which that lawyer wishes to end up practicing. I love property. I love property investing because I love that and I love talking about it. So I'd look at always using a solicitor as opposed to a conveyancer. There's no difference really in relation to pricing. It just comes down to the expertise in relation to who you will have, a solicitor or a conveyancer.
David, that's great. Now, thank you. Let's delve into property searches. Would you mind explaining the different types of searches and pinpoint which ones are absolutely critical for buyers? Because I do appreciate they come at different price points. So it will be good for our audience to know which searches are a lot more critical than others.
Yeah, look, the searches, they are really standard throughout all of Australia in the different jurisdictions. They might be named something different. However, what you are really wanting to look at is there anything affecting the property? So the main one for that one would be the title search. And a title search will advise as to whether there's any encumbrances or anything which is affecting the title itself. And then we can end up looking at getting something else in relation to that. The next one would be a copy of the plan. And it is actually very important to get that, to be able to identify and make sure that the actual lot and the property which you are purchasing is actually the correct one. You'd be very surprised how many times in a year that somebody will be buying lot 19, but in actual fact, the real property is lot 20, and suddenly there's been a conveyance and you've bought the wrong property. You've got your next door neighbour's house. Then there are other things. Very important to get a land tax search. And what a land tax search, it identifies whether there is any money which is owed by the seller on land tax for that property. Now, land tax passes with the land. So if you didn't get a land tax search and there was no adjustment made on settlement, then you've just bought a property with land tax, which you then would have to pay. So that's extremely important to get one of those particular searches. Say, for instance, I'll call it a main road search in Queensland. It's different in other states, it can be called. However, that particular search will advise as to whether there's any requirement from the local authority, state government, or even federal government associated with that property in itself, whether now, immediately, or if it's envisaged in the future, 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, 10 years from now, you'll end up having details in relation to that. And we have had many occasions where suddenly we found that the property is being resumed or part of the property being resumed. And in those circumstances, you can end up terminating the contract and ultimately, or you can actually renegotiate in relation to the actual contract itself. More searches would be the rates and water searches. Now, we obtain those to be able to do the adjustments on settlement. So with the rates and water, the seller is responsible up until the day of settlement, where the buyer is then responsible thereafter. So whether they're paid or not paid, we have to do the adjustments. But also with the rate search or the council search, that will also provide details as to whether there are any administrative notices which affect the property, whether there's any enforcement notices, or anything really which is going to be detrimental to somebody buying. And again, in those circumstances, depending upon which state you're buying in, you might be able to seek compensation or terminate the contract as well. We also would be doing a flood search that would determine whether the property is in a flood zone. And if it is, again, it's a decision as to whether you wish to purchase a property. Personally, I would not buy a property which is affected by flooding. Those really are the main searches which you would end up obtaining. They're the ones I obtain when I end up buying a property. There are a myriad of so many other searches you can potentially get, and you should be given details in relation to what they are and what they will reveal, but they're not really necessary in relation to protecting yourself whilst end up doing your conveyance.
No, wonderful. And thanks for sharing all of that. And certainly, it's a huge number of searches one can go for, and it has to be the optimization of the value of the searches at the cost that we're getting needs to be considered. So thanks for sharing that, David, giving an overview of what standard searches actually include. Now, thank you. Now, just moving to the next level, like in the purchasing process, we tend to go and put some conditions when we buy the property, and one of them that we do as a buyer's agent is asking for a building and pest inspection clause. So just very quickly, what do you mean by building and pest inspection clause, and what does it entail, with any exception to any state that you might like to bring to our notice?
All right, we'll start with Queensland. So Queensland has the best building and pest inspection clause, because in the actual contract, it says that the results need to be to the buyer's satisfaction. So when you end up getting the results back, every single building and pest report will have issues or defects noted, as the building inspectors need to note everything. And there were minor defects, there might be major defects, there might be major structural defects. And with Queensland, for instance, you would be entitled to negotiate, depending upon ultimately what those defects are, with the seller. And that's whether you want the seller to rectify those, or even maybe negotiate in relation to the price. Now we go to Western Australia. Unfortunately, Western Australia is the hardest one when it comes to the building and pest. They have their annexures, and with their building and pest, if the building report shows major structural issues, and it has to be major structural issues, you still have to give the seller the opportunity to agree to rectify those defects at their cost. And it's only if they say no, that's when you can terminate the contract. And with the pest report, if it shows pest damage or pest infestation, again, you have to give them the opportunity to rectify those at their cost. If they say no, you can terminate. If in Western Australia, the report showed minor defects, or even it could be a major defect, but it's not major structural, you cannot negotiate and you cannot terminate the contract. We might go a little bit different in Victoria. In Victoria, with the building and pest, again, you can't end up negotiating unless you have an amended clause building and pest, but you can't negotiate with their standard clause if it has minor defects or even a major defect. But if it shows a major structural defect, you're entitled to terminate the contract. So you don't have to go back and see whether or not somebody's prepared to agree to rectify at their cost. You just can terminate if you wish to. New South Wales, South Australia, you'll be doing the building and pest inspections prior to the end of the cooling off period. And as it's before the end of the cooling off period, you are entitled to terminate a contract if you're not satisfied with those building and pest reports prior to the expiration of the cooling off periods. So it's very different in each state.
No, look, totally. And this is really great because when we deal with our investors, and we really need to explain all of this, like based on where we are buying, the clause that we are putting in has different weightage accordingly. And just in that same tone, like if you don't mind me asking this about the deposit money. In what scenarios does the deposit money, for example, in New South Wales, we put a standard 0.25%, or probably that's the case with the Queensland properties as well. In which scenario is that money, the deposit money, is refundable by the seller should building and pest inspection clause fail?
In the different states, a deposit money is really fairly safe. And I'd say it's fairly safe in that you would never lose your deposit if you do not breach the contract. And you are entitled to the refund of the deposit if you lawfully terminate the contract pursuant to the contract. So for instance, again, we'll talk about Queensland. Queensland, if you're not satisfied with the building and pest, you can terminate the contract. The deposit is refunded 100% in full. Again, if you don't get finance, your deposit is refunded 100% in full. Now, that is in every state if you terminate lawfully pursuant to the terms of the contract. Now, there are different states where you would end up losing a proportion of the deposit. So in New South Wales, for instance, there is a 0.25 of 1% penalty if you terminate the contract during the cooling off period. And that's before the contract is unconditional. During the cooling off period, you're obtaining your building and pest, you're obtaining your finance. So once those are approved, then it goes unconditional. So during the cooling off period, you would lose that 0.25 or 1%. And you would lose that 0.25. Victoria, it's 0.2 of 1% if you terminate under the cooling off period, but you might end up terminating under the finance or the building and pest, where there is no penalty at all. So you would get 100% of your deposit back. In Western Australia, it's very difficult there because there is no cooling off period. So you'd only be able to terminate if under the building and pest, if the seller doesn't agree to rectify a major defect, major structural defect, or pest damage or pest infestation, or if you don't get finance, then you can terminate the contract and you do get your deposit back 100% in full.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Look, again, it's a country with multiple states. It seems that it's a country with different rules based on which state we are talking about.
Absolutely.
And that's really is important for someone like yourself who has rights and not just the knowledge to operate on the states, that who can really come and explain to the audience or the investors the key differences in operating in those states. So thank you so much, David, for sharing that. Now, just moving to the next steps. So for example, like when we're in the process of buying the property, and now assuming everything was all right, there was no issue with the building and pest inspection, and we have gone unconditional on the property. And now the next steps as a buyer's agent, we really need to make sure that we are fully insured for the property. We start talking about finding the tenant in place. So we'll probably start doing the research on the property manager. But coming back to the insurance, when do you think is appropriate for the buyer or the new buyer to have the right insurances in place? So David, help us understand when we should be thinking about insurances for the property.
That's a really good question there, Rasti, because in different states, the risk of a property ends up being the buyer's risk at different times. So in Queensland, the risk of the property is the buyer's risk as of 1 business day after the contract date. So that's before settlement. And it is said in the contract, you should end up obtaining insurance straight away. Now, if the contract is subject to finance and subject to building and pest, I don't mind my clients waiting for a little bit period of time, but they still would need to get the insurance prior to the contract becoming unconditional. Now, other states of Australia, like Western Australia or Victoria, it's that the property remains the seller's risk up until the day of settlement. So at that stage, you should have insurance in place by the day of settlement. Now, in having said that though, when you're borrowing funds, so you're financing for the purchase of the property, your financier will require to see a copy of your certificate of currency for insurance. And they will require that before they certify the property ready for settlement. And so you would end up being obtaining at the latest 1 week, 1.5, 2 weeks before settlement, that certificate of insurance, because your financier will require it at that particular stage.
It makes perfect sense, David. So thanks for sharing that. let's talk about pre-settlement inspection. So this is my understanding, David, that when we bid for a property, of course, we look at the property, we look at the state of the property, and that's what we are buying it for. And then everything happens, I guess, like say, for example, positively, like no major structural issues, and finance gets approved. And now we are about to settle the property, everything being sorted out. The bank is ready, the settlement has been booked, and now a day before we go for pre-settlement inspection just to make sure that the property is pretty much in the same stage or the type what we actually saw at the time of making an offer. So is that the real understanding of pre-settlement inspection? And what if it's not, if at all it's any different? What's your, I guess, understanding or your insights around that?
Yeah, well, you're pretty right in relation to the reasoning behind the pre-settlement inspection. It is to make sure that the property is in the same condition as when you entered into the contract. And having that pre-settlement inspection, you then can see whether or not it has changed. When vendors are leaving the property, so you've got somebody occupy, they're leaving, they might cause damage in relation to the property when they do leave. Now, under the contracts, that any damage caused by a seller during the period of entering into the contract and the date of settlement is the responsibility of the seller. Now, it is a situation, unfortunately, where you can negotiate once you find if there are any issues. You can try to negotiate with the seller prior to the settlement going off for the seller to agree to rectify those things, or maybe reduce the purchase price by an amount, or have those works completed. The seller does not have to ultimately agree. Most people do, and there's no issue in relation to that, but then some people don't. And what happens in those circumstances is, unfortunately, you cannot hold up settlement. You cannot withhold any funds from settlement, but you do have that right of action to take against the seller after the settlement for whatever those costs are. And again, we've found ourselves in that particular situation or position where in the older days, go back 20, 25 years, you were able to hold up settlement, you were able to hold up some funds, but people were being unreasonable. So the courts came in, intervened and said, no, we're going to make a situation where you still have your right of action. So if you don't get an agreement, then you end up taking that matter on after the settlement. But you cannot hold up settlement. You can't withhold funds from settlement, which unfortunately a lot of people are not happy about. But that is unfortunately the contractual position and situation which we're in. And that was the reasoning behind as well as to how we've come to that particular stage. It was because people were unreasonable and the courts intervened.
Yeah, now that makes sense. And thanks for sharing on that. Now, for someone who's new to the property investing in this country, of course, there's so many, I guess, parties or the stakeholders, as well at the same time, the anxiety that goes around it. And then all the legal aspects about, I guess, this is just about so I guess from the legal point of view, what we've been just discussing, but then there's other things going around for that buyer. Just for them, someone who's new to the buying process in this country, would you be able to provide a very succinct, very brief walkthrough of the property buying process in general?
I'd certainly end up saying that probably the best thing is to get the right professionals around you first. And once you find a property, it has to be appropriate to your circumstances and your situation. So it's got to be appropriate in relation to the area, the cost involved. Do not be emotional in relation to the property in itself, because what you might like, other people might not like. The colors you like, those types of things, it does not matter. Every single property will have its day, and every single suburb will have its day. And so there's always areas where you're going to end up getting your growth. So when you've got the right professionals with you, you'll have from your buyer's agents the ability to buy in the right areas, the right type of property, and for the right value in relation to it. And a really good tip is understand that property investing is a long-term investment, and in the long term, you will always succeed. And you end up making your money not when you sell, you make it when you buy. So the right people around, the right experts around, buy the right property, you will not have any problems at all.
Now, thank you for sharing that. And look, it's amazing what you surround yourself with the right team members who have done it successfully, who knows how things are done, rather than just by learning your own mistakes. So that's probably one of the great tips. So thanks for sharing that. Really appreciate it. And just again, because you are a property investor yourself and you know the laws very well, in your opinion, are there any common pitfalls or hurdles buyers should be vigilant about when navigating this journey of property buying?
I think probably the biggest pitfall I see from investors is the indecisiveness. So not really understanding when you should make that decision that, yes, I'm going to be prepared to buy this particular property. There are so many properties out there on the market. There are so many different things in relation to properties which you could, people that have their list of things I need to tick off. It needs to have this, that. If you end up doing and waiting till you get the 10 out of 10 ticks, you're going to be missing out on many opportunities. So being indecisive, you will also potentially miss out when you decide that, yes, I'm going to buy that one. It's already been sold to somebody else. So be confident and be decisive. And once you've found that property, make that decision and buy the property. And listen to your experts who are with you.
Yeah, totally, because there's a trusted team around for a reason. And sometimes with the first time, or there's a lot of anxiety, as you can appreciate, as we appreciate, there's a lot of anxiety, but it's more about going with the confidence, going with the experience of expert here. That makes a lot of difference.
Absolutely. I know when I bought my first property, I was a little bit indecisive. I was wondering, what am I going to do? What am I getting into? But once I got the first, did the second and the third, then it became second nature. And once it becomes second nature, it might take me 5 minutes to decide to buy a property. And I've made decisions literally when somebody's walked through the door and said, oh, look at this. I've turned around and said, well, give me the contract, please. And then I got my wife to sign.
For sure. Happy wife, happy life. They have to be on the same page.
Absolutely.
This is great, David. Thanks for sharing that. And now, how does your firm, Priority Legal Services, optimize or enhance the buying process?
I guess it comes right from the absolute start as to the process with our clients. I always request that we end up doing the contract review. And so our clients, right from the start, will be advised in relation to their legal obligations and what the terms and conditions of the contract is from the start. We'll also advise if there needs to be any amendments in relation to that. And we also discuss any of the property investing aspects, which they can talk to us in relation to anything associated with that. The big thing about conveyancing and the property investing is communication. And so having that ability to contact us anytime, and even on weekends, etc. like that, it ends up being a situation which makes it a lot easier for clients. And when you've got questions, phone up and ask or email. Simple is we will give you those answers. Doing conveyancing for 36 years, over 30,000 conveyances, there's nothing which we really haven't actually experienced. So we can answer any questions when you have them. Through the whole process, once you go through, we will deal with everything behind the scenes. So from a buyer's point of view, really what you'd be looking at is you'd be making sure you've got your finance application going through and keeping on top of that. Then we end up talking about the building and pest. And that will be looked after by your buyer's agent, etc. Once you get the results, we go through those results and see what we can do and whether there's negotiations. Once the contract is unconditional, there's not really much for a buyer to do other than to sit back and wait whilst all the other work is done in the background. And then you come up to that pre-settlement inspection and also having the funds available for the settlement at that time, which we will go through and walk through those processes with you. So we try to make it as easy as possible and us as accessible as possible as well. And having the knowledge we have, you can certainly always pick our brains, and particularly mine, because I love talking property.
Now, look, we have dealt in so many occasions together for many mutual clients, and I've seen that experience as well firsthand, that how you help, and even purchasing my properties as well, David. So I really, really appreciate what you and Priority Legal Services are doing, not just for myself, but also Get Rid family members. So really, really appreciate it. Now, just on that, like, should anyone want to connect with you directly, how should they reach out to you, David?
I always have my personal mobile available, 0406 443 684, email, text, or even just contact the office direct. And we have also my office manager, Chantel Pretty. You can certainly contact her as well. She's also available 24 hours, 7 days a week. And and anytime, simple, anytime.
And just to wrap up our discussion here, David, are there any parting thoughts or pearls of wisdom you would like to share with our audience?
Understand property investing is a long-term investment. Don't be indecisive. Make the decision and get your first, the second, the third, the fourth, and so on. Fantastic way. It is the way that I have created a lot of wealth. And yeah.
Folks, as we wrap up this insightful session with David, let's remember a crucial takeaway. The journey of property investment isn't just about bricks and mortar. It's about the wisdom you gather, the team you build, and the vision you carry forward. Investing in property is also about investing in yourself. Hence, stay hungry for knowledge, stay savvy in your choices, and surround yourself with a solid team that will propel you towards success. Because, as we always say here on the Get Rid Show, it's all about going up and upwards. If you found value in today's episode, I urge you to hit that like button. Let us know your thoughts, questions, or experience in the comments section. We love hearing from you. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell icon to stay updated on more insights, expert interviews, and invaluable content, then please do so. Remember, the sky isn't the limit. It's just the beginning. Keep soaring, and we'll see you in the next episode.